Tonight, we are going to slow down together and lie down inside some of the oldest words ever written about the night. Words that were spoken long before any of us were here. Words that have been read aloud in dark rooms, beside sick beds, and in the quiet hours of the morning for thousands of years. Not to be studied tonight, not to be understood, only to be rested in, the way a tired body rests in a bed it did not have to build. They have carried a great deal of peace to a great many people, and they are not finished doing that yet. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is right now and where you are listening from. It is quietly comforting to notice who else is awake tonight, carrying their own anxious thoughts into this same darkness. You are not the only one. You do not need to know anything about Scripture to listen tonight. You do not need any particular belief. You do not need to follow along. You only need to be here. Let the words move over you like warm water. Let your body settle into the grace of being read to. There is nothing to figure out tonight. There is nowhere else to be. Nothing to solve before you are allowed to rest. Nothing to remember in the morning. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Chapel. Let us begin. There is a line at the very beginning of the oldest book, on its very first page, that almost everyone reads past without noticing. It is a small line. It repeats 6 times in a row, and it may quietly change how you feel about being awake right now. The line is this: "And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day." Read it again slowly. Evening first, then morning, then the day is complete. That is not the order most of us live by. We think of a day as beginning when the alarm goes off. We think of the night as the leftover part, the part at the end when the real day is over, the part where nothing important happens, the part we are supposed to get through so the next day can start. But the oldest book does not count days that way. In its reckoning, the day begins at sundown. The night is not the tail end of something. It is the beginning. Everything that happens tomorrow begins tonight, in the dark, while you are lying still. That is a strange and quiet gift for anyone who is awake at this hour. Consider what it means. It means the darkness is not a gap in the day. It is not wasted time. It is not the part of your life that does not count. It is where the day starts. It is the first movement of the music, not the silence after the last note. There is more in that first page. Before the light was made, there was darkness. The story does not say the darkness was a problem to be fixed. It says something gentler than that. It says the presence of God was moving over the face of the deep, moving over the dark water, present in it, at home in it, not waiting for the lights to come on in order to be there. That is worth sitting with tonight. If you have been feeling that the darkness is where God is not, if you have been feeling that the night is when you are furthest from anything good, the first page of the oldest book says otherwise. It says the dark was the first room, and it was not empty. There is a way the anxious mind treats the night. It treats it as enemy territory. It treats it as the hours when everything is worse and nothing can be done. And there is a reason for that. And the reason is not a failure in you. Everything does feel worse at night. Your worries are genuinely larger at 2 in the morning than they are at 2 in the afternoon. That is not your imagination. That is how a tired brain works. It has less capacity available to hold perspective. So the same ordinary problem arrives with fewer resources standing behind it. Notice that. The problem did not grow in the night. Your capacity narrowed. And the narrowing is temporary. And it is reversible. And it has reversed itself every single morning of your life so far. That is worth saying again, slowly. The thing that is bothering you right now is very likely the same size it was this afternoon. It has not changed. You have simply arrived at the hour when you have the least equipment to carry it, which is exactly why the night is not the time to solve anything. The night is not a workshop. The night is a bed. But there is something even more freeing in that ancient line. If the day begins at evening, then the night is not the hour when you must have everything solved. It is the hour when the day is only beginning. Nothing is late yet. Nothing has failed. You are at the start of something, not at the end of it. Think of a farmer in an old village walking in from the fields as the sun goes down behind the ridge. He does not feel that his day has failed because the light is leaving. He feels that the day is turning the way a page turns, the way a season turns. He puts his tools against the wall of the house. He washes his hands in a basin of cool water. He eats something simple with his family at a small wooden table. He sits for a while afterward with nothing in particular to do. Then he lies down, and the room goes dark around him, and he sleeps. And in the morning, the second half of that same day begins. Nobody in that village would have said the farmer wasted the night. Nobody would have said the sleeping part did not count. The sleeping was simply the first movement of the day, the way the quiet opening bars of a piece of music are the first movement, and not a delay before the music starts. You are in the first half of your day right now, not the end of yesterday, the beginning of tomorrow. And in this half of the day, the only work assigned to you is rest. That is a strange kind of assignment for a mind that is used to doing. It cannot be done well or badly. It cannot be finished early. It cannot be performed. It happens to you when you stop preventing it. That is all rest has ever been. Not an achievement, a permission. Consider how the first page describes what God made in the dark. He separated light from darkness, and then, in a phrase that is easy to skip, he named them both. He called the light day. He called the darkness night. Both were named. Both were given a place. Neither was called a mistake. That is a small kindness in an old text. The night was named. It was given its own word. It was not treated as the absence of something better, or as the leftover material after the light had been made. It was treated as a thing in itself, with its own name, with its own place in the order of the world. Consider how differently we treat things that have names. A thing with a name has been noticed. A thing with a name has been claimed. When you name something, you are saying it exists in its own right, and that it belongs somewhere. The night was named on the first page of the oldest book, before anything else in the world had been arranged. You are inside something that was named on the first page. You are not in a gap. You are not in the part that does not count. You are in the night which has a name, and which was made on purpose, and which has been carrying sleeping people since the beginning of the world. Consider how many people have slept through this same darkness before you. Every generation that ever lived lay down in it. Farmers and kings and children and old women. People who were worried about their crops. People who were worried about their sons. People who had exactly the kind of thought that is keeping you up right now, and who eventually stopped having it, because the body always eventually wins. All of them slept in this same night, and the night held all of them. There is a peace available here that most of us miss because we are in a hurry to get to morning. The peace of being in a made thing. The peace of being held inside a design rather than lost outside of one. Notice how the dark actually feels when you stop resisting it. Notice the temperature of the room. Notice the weight of the blanket. Notice the way sounds carry differently at night. How a distant car or a settling floorboard reaches you more clearly than it would in daylight. That is not a threat. That is just the world being quieter. The quiet is not empty, it is only quiet. There is a grace in the way the world was arranged. The light comes and the light goes. It has been doing this for a very long time, without any help from you. It went before you were born. It will go after, and every single time, without exception, it has come back. That is not something you have to believe. It is only something that happens. The sun has never once forgotten, and you have never once had to remind it. Somewhere in the anxious mind is a small belief that the night must be supervised, that if you fall asleep, something will slip, that the dark hours need a watchman, and the watchman is you. That belief is very old and very tiring, and it is not true. The night was made before you were. It has been managed for a very long time by someone else. And there was evening, and there was morning. The first day. You may rest inside that sentence tonight, not as a doctrine, not as a lesson, only as a shape. Evening comes, morning comes. That is the pattern. It has held for every single day there has ever been. It is holding right now while you lie here. Feel the dark around you now, and let it be a made thing, not a void, not an absence, a named part of the world arranged deliberately, with a beginning and a middle and an end that arrives on its own without any help from you. Feel the way the room holds you. Feel the mattress underneath, taking the full weight of your body without any effort on your part. Feel the quiet doing its own slow work in the corners of the room. Feel that you are inside the first half of a day that has only just begun, and that the only task in this half of it is to let yourself be held. Notice how the mind wants to argue with this. Notice how it wants to say that the night is different this time, that this particular worry is the exception, that tonight is not like all the other nights that were held. That is only the tired brain narrowing. Let it narrow. It does not have to be persuaded. It only has to be allowed to grow quiet, which it will on its own, the way the light does. You are not in the leftover hours. You are at the beginning of something. And the beginning is dark, the way beginnings often are, and the darkness was called good. Consider how many people are awake with you at this exact moment, doing the ordinary night work of the world. Nurses on a ward, checking on people who are asleep. A baker somewhere with flour on his hands. Someone in a control room watching numbers that will never make the news. A parent in a chair with a child who has a fever. A driver on a long road with the radio low. None of them are having a spiritual experience. They are working, and between them they are holding up the entire night shift of civilization, quietly, while most people sleep through it and never think about it once. You have been held by that arrangement your whole life. Every night you have ever slept, someone was awake somewhere making sure the ordinary things kept running. You never had to know their names. It worked anyway. Consider what else is happening in the world at this hour. Somewhere it is the middle of the afternoon. Somewhere people are eating lunch. Somewhere a bakery is opening and the ovens are being lit for a morning that has already arrived. The darkness you are lying in is not global. It is a local condition produced by the fact that you happen to be on the side of a rotating object that is currently facing away from a star. That is a strange and slightly comic thing to remember at 2 a.m. Your night is a shadow. It is the shadow of the ground you are lying on. It is moving west at a steady speed and will be gone from over you in a few hours, regardless of anything anyone does. Notice that nobody is operating this. There is no one deciding each evening whether to bring the dark. It simply arrives because of an arrangement so old and so reliable that we have built our entire biology around trusting it. You have been trusting it your whole life without noticing. Every single evening you have assumed the morning, even on the worst nights, even when you did not want the morning to come. That assumption has never once been wrong. Let the night be the night. Let the morning be the morning's problem. There was evening. There will be morning. And you are held between them, exactly where you are meant to be. Consider what Jacob did with the rest of that morning. He did not linger. He got up and he set the stone upright, and he poured a little oil over the top of it, which was what people in that country did to mark a place as significant. Then he gave the place a name. He called it the House of God. And then he picked up his things and kept walking north, because the situation he was running from had not changed, and the relatives he was walking toward were still expecting him. That is worth noticing. The vision did not end the journey. He still had years of difficulty ahead of him, and the story tells all of them in detail, and several of them are worse than the night in the field. What he had received was not an exemption. It was a marker, a single upright stone in a place he could point to afterward and say, "There. That is where I found out I was not alone in it." You may collect a few of those in a lifetime. Not many. 3 or 4 perhaps. Small upright stones scattered through your years, marking nights when something shifted that you could not have arranged. You do not need a new one tonight. The old ones are still standing. Let us rest inside another story. There is a story near the beginning of the oldest book about a young man who slept in the open country with a stone under his head and woke up different. His name was Jacob. He was running away from home. He had done something in his family that had made staying impossible, and he had left in a hurry, and he was walking north toward relatives he had never met, in a country he did not know. Consider the country he was crossing. Dry hills, thin soil, terraces where anything could be grown, and bare rock where nothing could. Small villages a half day apart, and long stretches between them with nobody at all. A road that was less a road than a habit, worn into the ground by people who had gone that way before. It was not dangerous exactly, but it was empty, and a 19-year-old walking it alone with everything he owned in a bag would have felt the emptiness by mid-afternoon. He had been walking all day. When the sun went down, he was still in open country. There was no village, there was no inn, there was no house belonging to anyone he could ask. There was only a stretch of rocky ground, some low scrub, and the sky beginning to darken over the hills. So he stopped where he was. He found a place among the stones where the ground was slightly level. He took one of the stones and set it under his head as a pillow, the way travelers did in that country and in that century, and he lay down to sleep in that place. Consider what he was carrying that night. He was young and alone and going somewhere he did not want to go. He had made a mess of things behind him. There was a brother he was afraid of. There was a father he had disappointed. There was a whole life he had left in the middle of the afternoon, without knowing whether he would ever be allowed to return to it. If any person in this old book had reason to lie awake, it was this one. He had every ingredient: regret behind him, uncertainty ahead of him, no roof over him, a rock under his head. You may know a version of this night, a night when you were between two places, a night when what was behind you could not be fixed, and what was ahead of you could not be known, a night when the bed itself felt like a stone. Most people, at some point, sleep on a stone. It does not have to be literal. And then Jacob fell asleep. The story does not make anything of that. It simply says he lay down in that place and slept, which is remarkable in itself given the day he had had. Sometimes the body is simply so tired that it takes over. Sometimes exhaustion is its own mercy. And while he was sleeping, something happened. The story says he dreamed. He saw a ladder or a stairway set on the earth with its top reaching into the sky, and on it, going up and coming down, were messengers of God. Going up and coming down, continuous, unhurried, a quiet traffic between heaven and the ground, right above the place where he had lain down. Notice where the ladder was set, not in a temple, not in a city, not in a holy place. It was set in the open country, on ordinary, rocky ground in a spot with no name, where a tired young man had happened to stop walking because the sun had gone down. Then, in the dream, someone was standing beside him, and the voice said something very simple. It said, "I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and I will not leave you." That was all. There was no lecture. There was no list of what he had done wrong. There was no requirement. There was only a presence and a promise given to a sleeping man who had not asked for it and was in no condition to earn it. When Jacob woke up, the sun was coming over the hills. He sat up slowly on the hard ground with the stone still lying beside him. The light was gray and then gold. The country around him looked exactly as it had the night before. Nothing had changed. There was no ladder. There were no messengers. There was only rock and scrub and the long empty road he still had to walk. And he said something that has stayed in the language for 4,000 years. He said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." That is the sentence to carry into your own night. He did not say, "God arrived while I was sleeping." He did not say, "God came down for me last night because I was in trouble." He said something stranger and better than that. He said, "God was here the whole time. In this rocky field, in this nowhere place, under this open sky, and I did not know it. I lay down thinking I was completely alone. I was not alone. I simply did not have the eyes for it." Notice how much of that is a comfort available to you exactly as you are. Jacob did not become worthy of the ladder before it appeared above him. He did not repair his family first. He did not resolve his fear of his brother. He did not make a plan or say the right words or promise to do better. He lay down on the ground, exhausted, in the middle of the worst week of his life, and grace came and stood beside him while he was unconscious. That is the shape of grace in this old story, and it is worth noticing carefully. The presence did not wait for him to be ready. The presence did not wait for him to notice, or to deserve it, or to be in a fit state to receive it. It was already there when he arrived at that field. It stayed all night while he slept through it, and it was still there in the morning when he woke up and did not understand what had happened. Grace of that kind does not depend on your participation. That is what makes it grace. If it required you to be awake, or grateful, or spiritually alert at 2 a.m, it would be something else. A transaction, perhaps. A reward. But this is not that. This is simply a presence that was already in the field. You may be lying in your own version of that field tonight. You may feel that this is a nowhere place, that nothing important is happening here, that this room, at this hour, with this particular worry, is not the sort of place where anything good is going on. The story says otherwise. The story says the ladder is set in the ordinary place. The story says the traffic between heaven and the ground is happening above the field where you happened to stop walking. Not the field you meant to reach. This one, the one you are in. There is a peace in that which does not require you to do anything at all. You do not have to see the ladder. Jacob did not see it while he was awake. He saw it while he was asleep, which is to say, He saw it when he had finally stopped trying to manage his own situation. Consider the stone for a moment. In the morning, Jacob took the stone he had used as a pillow and set it upright, and poured oil over it and made it a marker of the place. He turned the hard thing he had slept on into the memorial of the night God spoke to him. That is often how it goes in a life. The stone you resent tonight becomes, years later, the thing you point at when someone asks where you learned what you know. Not because the hardness was good in itself, because something happened while you were lying on it that you could not have arranged for yourself and would not have received any other way. You do not have to do anything with your stone tonight. You do not have to make it meaningful. You do not have to find the lesson hidden inside the hard thing. You only have to lie down on it and let the night do what nights do. The meaning, if there is meaning, will find you later, in daylight, when you are rested enough to see it. There is a peace in that permission, the peace of not having to redeem your own difficulty tonight, the peace of being allowed to simply have a hard week without also being required to understand it. You can rest on the stone without approving of the stone. Those are two entirely different things, and only one of them is required of you at this hour. Notice also that Jacob was given no instructions. The voice did not tell him how to fix his family. It did not give him a plan for meeting his brother again. It did not explain what would happen next, or how long the running would last, or whether any of it would turn out well. It said only, "I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go," which is a promise about company, not about outcomes. That may be exactly the promise you need tonight, not a resolution, not an answer about how things will turn out, not a guarantee, only company, only the quiet assurance that wherever this is going, you are not going there by yourself. Feel the ground under you now. Feel the weight of your head where it rests. Feel the room as an ordinary place, with no particular holding to it, no altar, no special light, nothing that would make anyone call it sacred. And let the story tell you that this is exactly the kind of place where the ladder gets set. Feel the quiet traffic above you, unhurried, going up and coming down, not requiring your attention, not requiring your belief, happening whether you are awake for it or not, the way a great deal of the important work of the world happens without anyone watching. Let yourself rest inside that, not as an idea to hold, as a weight to put down. There is a peace that comes from realizing that the presence you have been reaching for was never further away than the field you fell asleep in. It did not have to be summoned. It did not have to be deserved. It was already standing beside the stone. You are held tonight in a nowhere field, in the dark, on a stone, by a grace that arrived before you did, and will still be there when you open your eyes. Surely the Lord is in this place, and you did not know it, and you do not have to know it. It is true regardless of whether you feel it tonight. Let us rest inside another story. There is a story in the older part of the scriptures about a child who heard his name in the dark 3 times and did not know who was calling him. His name was Samuel. He was very young. The story does not say exactly how old, but old enough to sleep alone in a room, and young enough that the older man who cared for him still had to explain things to him twice. He lived at a small sanctuary in a hill town. It was not a grand place. It was an old building with worn stone and heavy curtains, and a lamp that was kept burning through the night. Samuel had been brought there as a small child by his mother, who had wanted him to grow up in a quiet house near the lamp. He slept in a room near the sanctuary itself, on a low mat, close enough to hear the lamp being tended. The old man who looked after him was named Eli. Eli was a priest. He was very old by this point. His eyesight had grown so poor that he could barely see across a room. He was not a strong man anymore, or an especially wise one. But he was kind to the boy, and the boy trusted him. The story says something quiet before it begins. It says that in those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. It was a dry time, a time when heaven felt distant, and the sanctuary was mostly a building, and the lamp was mostly a lamp. You may know a season like that, a stretch of months or years when whatever you used to feel was not there anymore. Not because anything dramatic happened. It simply went quiet. The prayers you used to say became words. The building became a building. That is the season this story starts in. There is a detail in the way the scene is set that deserves a moment. The text says the lamp of God had not yet gone out. That lamp was kept burning in the sanctuary through the night, and someone had the job of tending it, adding oil, trimming the wick. It is a small housekeeping detail, but the writer put it in for a reason. It tells you the hour. It was late, but not yet the deepest part of the night. The lamp was low and still going. Notice that the voice came while the lamp was still lit, not in total darkness. In the last of the light, in the part of the night when things are winding down but have not yet fully stopped. That is roughly where you are right now. It was night. The lamp of God had not yet gone out. Samuel was lying down in his usual place, near the sanctuary, in the dark. And then, in the quiet, a voice said his name. Samuel. He sat up at once. He assumed it was Eli. Who else would it be? He got up and went to the old man's room and said, "Here I am. You called me." Eli was half asleep. He said, "I did not call you. Go back and lie down." So Samuel went back and lay down. And the voice came again, "Samuel." Again he got up. Again he walked to the old man's room in the dark. Again he said, "Here I am, you called me." And again Eli said, "I did not call you, my son. Go back and lie down." So he went back and lay down. And it happened a third time, Samuel. Notice what the story does with this repetition. It does not rush it. It tells it 3 separate times, almost in the same words. The boy hears his name. The boy gets up. The boy goes to the old man. The old man sends him back. It is patient and slow and a little funny in the way real life is funny. A child in a dark house, walking back and forth, not understanding. On the third time, Eli finally understood what was happening. He was old and half blind and not much of a prophet anymore. It had been a long time since anyone in that house had heard anything, but he still recognized it when it came, the way a man recognizes a song he has not heard since childhood. He told the boy, "Go and lie down, and if the voice calls you again, say this, 'Speak, for your servant is listening.'" There is something quietly moving in that. The old man could not hear the voice himself. It was not calling him, it was calling the child in the next room. And instead of resenting that, he taught the boy how to answer it. He gave away the only thing he had left to give, which was knowing what the voice sounded like. So Samuel went back and lay down in his place. And the voice came again and stood there and called as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And the boy said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." That is the whole scene. A dark room, a child on a mat, a lamp still burning somewhere nearby, and a voice that had said his name 4 times before he understood what was happening. Consider first how gentle the whole thing is. The voice did not thunder. It did not shake the building. It did not announce itself with any of the machinery we associate with such moments. It said a name, quietly, in a dark room, to a sleeping child. And when the child misunderstood, it simply waited and said the name again. That is a great deal of patience for a voice that could have done anything. Consider also that Samuel was in bed. He was not standing in the sanctuary. He was not praying. He was not doing anything spiritual at all. He was lying down in the dark, in his ordinary sleeping place, at the end of an ordinary day, and that is where his name was spoken. There is a comfort in that for anyone awake at this hour. If you have felt that the useful part of your faith happens somewhere else, at some other time, in some more organized posture, this story disagrees. The voice came to a child who was lying down. It came at night. It came in a bedroom. It came without the child doing anything to prepare for it. Notice also what the voice said. It said his name. That is all it said at first. Not an instruction, not a correction, not a demand, only a name, spoken by someone who knew it. That is worth sitting with tonight, if your mind has been busy telling you unkind things in the dark. There is a kind of voice that arrives at night and lists your failures in order. Most people know that voice well. It is loud, it is fast, and it always comes at the hour when you are far too tired to argue with it. That voice is not this one. This one only said a name, gently, 4 times, waiting for the boy to be ready to hear it. Notice how the anxious mind hears the night. It expects the darkness to bring accusation. It braces for it before anything has even been said. And so, when something finally does speak in the quiet, the mind assumes it must be a complaint, because a complaint is what it was expecting. But the first thing said to the child in the dark was his own name, spoken with affection by someone who had been watching over him the whole time. And the last thing said before the boy could answer was simply the name again, twice, Samuel. Samuel. That is the old way of saying a name when you love the person you are saying it to. There is a grace in that repetition that is easy to walk past. The voice did not correct the boy for going to the wrong room. It did not sigh. It did not say, "You have misunderstood me twice already." Grace of this kind has an unusual amount of time on its hands. It is willing to say your name as many times as the saying takes, without ever once making you feel slow. You may have been held by that patience longer than you know. Through the seasons when nothing was heard, through the years when the building was only a building, the lamp kept burning through all of it, tended by someone else, whether or not anyone in the house was awake to see it. Consider what the boy finally said. He did not say, "I understand." He did not say, "I am ready." He did not say, "I have prepared myself." He said, "Speak, for your servant is listening," which is only a way of saying, "I am here. I do not know what this is. I am listening anyway." That is all that was required of him. Not comprehension, not worthiness, only a small willingness to be present in the dark and let something be spoken over him. You may offer the same thing tonight if you want to. You do not have to say it out loud. You do not have to mean it particularly well. You do not have to know who you would be saying it to. It is enough to lie still in the dark and be quietly available to whatever is gentle. There is a peace in that posture that is different from the peace of having answers. It is the peace of a child who has stopped getting up and walking to the other room. The peace of someone who has finally lain back down and let the voice do the traveling. Feel the room around you now in your imagination. Feel a small lamp burning somewhere out of sight, low and steady, tended by someone else. Feel the mat beneath you. Feel the dark, not as a threat, but as the room where names get spoken softly. Feel the patience of it. 4 times the voice said his name. It was not in a hurry. It did not give up when he misunderstood. It did not scold him for going to the wrong room twice. It simply waited and said it again. until the boy was ready to hear who was speaking. That patience is still available to you. It has not run out. It has not been used up by the nights you misunderstood, or the years you did not answer, or the long seasons when the word was rare and you quietly stopped listening for it. You are held tonight by a grace that says names quietly in dark rooms. It knows yours. It has said it before, more times than you were awake to notice. It will say it again as many times as it takes, and it will never once be impatient with the number. Let yourself be held by that, not by understanding it, only by lying still inside it, the way the boy finally lay still on his mat, having stopped walking back and forth between rooms. Speak, for your servant is listening, or do not speak at all. Simply lie still. The lamp is burning, the voice is patient, and you are allowed to fall asleep before you understand any of it. Consider what happened to that boy afterward. He grew up in that building. He became, in time, the person people came to when they needed to know something. And the story says a phrase about him that is worth hearing at this hour. None of his words fell to the ground. That is an image from farming. It means nothing was wasted, nothing dropped and rotted where it fell. But notice where it started. It started with a child who did not recognize a voice and got up 3 times in the dark and went to the wrong room each time. That is the beginning of the most reliable prophet in that entire section of the scriptures. Not competence. Confusion, patiently corrected, 4 times in the middle of the night. You may be at the walking to the wrong room stage of something. Most people are, most of the time. It is not a disqualification. It is simply what the early part of hearing anything sounds like. There is another story that points to the same quiet. There is a line at the end of one of the oldest songs ever written that has been said aloud at bedsides for 3,000 years. It is short. It is 8 or 9 words, depending on the translation. And it was written, as far as anyone can tell, by a boy who spent his nights outside with sheep. The line is this: "In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone make me dwell in safety." Consider where that sentence came from. Before he was anything else, the man who wrote it was a shepherd, the youngest of many brothers, the one sent out with the flock because the older ones had more important work. He spent a great deal of his childhood outdoors, in the hills, at night with animals. That is a particular kind of life. It is not romantic, whatever the paintings suggest. It is cold and long and often extremely boring. A shepherd out with a flock does not get to sleep in a bed. He sleeps in the open or in a rough shelter of branches or lying across the entrance of a stone pen so that nothing can get past him without waking him first. He wakes several times a night. He listens, he counts, he goes back to sleep. And the sky over him, in a country with no artificial light anywhere in it, would have been extraordinary. Thousands of stars. The band of the galaxy visible straight across the middle of it. The moon moving slowly from one ridge to the other. The same sky, night after night, for years of a childhood. That is where the songs came from. Not from a study. Not from a temple with trained musicians. From a hillside, in the dark, with sheep breathing nearby, and the whole sky turning slowly overhead while a boy lay underneath it with nothing else to do. You may notice something in that line he wrote. He did not say, "When everything is settled, I will lie down and sleep." He did not say, "Once my brothers respect me," or "once the danger is past," or "once I understand what my life is for." He said, "In peace I will lie down and sleep, now, tonight, in the middle of whatever this is." And then he gave his reason. "For you alone make me dwell in safety." Notice that word, alone. It is doing a great deal of work in a very short sentence. He is not saying he is safe because of the pen, or the fire, or the sling in his belt, or the fact that he is a light sleeper. He is saying the safety comes from somewhere else, something that does not depend on his own vigilance. That is what makes the line usable at 2 in the morning. If the safety came from your own watchfulness, then falling asleep would be the moment you lost it. And that is exactly what the anxious mind believes. It believes that sleep is a lapse in security, that closing your eyes is the same as letting go of the rope. The shepherd is saying it is not. He is saying the safety was never yours to hold. It was held by someone else the whole time, including on all the nights you stayed awake for it. Consider how many nights he must have lain out there before that sentence became true for him. It is not the sentence of someone who has had an easy life. Every one of his other songs suggests otherwise. He wrote about enemies, about betrayal, about years spent hiding in caves, about being hunted across open country, about grief that would not lift for a very long time. This is not a man who slept well, because nothing had ever happened to him. Quite the opposite. A great deal had happened to him. He slept well when he slept well, because he had come to believe something about who was keeping watch. There is a story sometimes told about him from the years before anyone knew his name. It is not in the scriptures. It is the kind of story shepherds tell about shepherds. They say that as a boy he was afraid of the dark for a long time. Not the darkness itself, but what could come out of it. Wild animals came down from the hills at night. He had heard them. He had lost animals to them. So he taught himself to stay awake. He would sit up against the stone wall of the pen with his back straight, listening. All night, every night, and by morning he would be shaking with tiredness. An older shepherd from a neighboring flock saw him one morning at the well and asked him why he looked so ruined. The boy said, "Because I have to watch all night." The old man said, "And does it help?" The boy said, "Of course it helps. If I do not watch, something will come." The old man was quiet for a moment. He set his jar down on the stone lip of the well. He said, "And on the nights when you fell asleep by accident, in spite of yourself, what came then?" The boy thought about it. He had not thought about it before. He said nothing. The old man said, "And on the nights you watched, what came then?" The boy said, also nothing. The old man picked his jar back up. He said, "Then it seems the flock has been kept either way. Perhaps the keeping is not being done by your eyes." He filled his jar and walked away. He did not explain further. Old shepherds in that country did not tend to explain things twice. That is the whole story. But the boy, they say, thought about it for a long time afterward. He thought about it while walking. He thought about it while the animals grazed, and eventually he began to lie down on purpose, a little at a time, testing it. And eventually, somewhere in the middle of all the hard years that followed, he wrote a line about lying down in peace, because someone else was doing the keeping. You may be sitting up against the wall of your own pen tonight, back straight, listening, waiting for whatever comes out of the dark in your particular life. Money, health, a person you love, a conversation you have to have, something you cannot control at this hour, something you will not be able to control at 3 either. The list is familiar. You know it well. Notice how the watching feels like it is helping. It always does. That is the trick of it. The mind keeps the vigil all night and then quietly credits itself with the quiet morning, as though the two were connected. But consider the nights you did sleep, the ones where exhaustion simply won and took you under before you had finished worrying. Did the world come apart while you were gone? Or did you wake up tired into a day that was more or less the same day it would have been either way? That is not an argument against caring. You care about the people and things you are worried about, and that caring is good, and it is part of why you are awake. It is only an observation about mechanics. The caring is real. The watching does not add to it. The two feel connected at 2 in the morning, and they are not. The shepherd's line is not a promise that nothing bad will ever happen. He knew better than that. He had lost animals to the dark. Later in his life, he lost far more than animals, and wrote about that too, in songs that are much harder to read than this one. The line is smaller and more useful than a promise. It says only this: the keeping is not yours. It never was. You are permitted to lie down. There is a grace in being demoted from the position of watchman. It feels like a loss at first, the way any demotion does. Then gradually it feels like a bed. That is how this particular grace tends to arrive. Not as a gift you recognize immediately, as a weight quietly removed from a shoulder you had forgotten was carrying anything. Say the line slowly to yourself now, if you want to. You do not have to believe it tonight. You do not have to mean it. You can simply hold it the way you would hold a smooth stone in your pocket. In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone make me dwell in safety. Notice the order of it. Lie down first. The peace is not something you achieve before lying down. It is not a prerequisite. It is the manner of the lying down itself. That is grace. It comes with the lying down, not before it. You are held before you are convinced. That is worth repeating. You are held before you are convinced. Feel the hillside now in your imagination. Feel the cool air on your face and the rough weight of a blanket over you. Feel the animals nearby, breathing slowly, already asleep, entirely unconcerned with the things that concern you. Feel the enormous sky over you, moving so slowly that you cannot see it move. Feel the ground under your back, holding your whole weight without any effort at all. Feel the boy who wrote the line, somewhere out there in the same dark, finally lying down after years of sitting up against a stone wall. Feel what his shoulders must have felt like the first night he let them touch the ground. Feel the strange relief of having been wrong about something exhausting. You are held tonight by whatever it is that has been keeping the watch. It kept it on every night you sat up for it, unnecessarily. It kept it on the nights you were too tired to help. It is keeping it right now, while you lie here half listening. And it will keep it after you fall asleep, and through the hours you will not remember, and into a morning that you do not have to organize from here. Notice that you have not been asked to trust this permanently. You have only been asked to lie down for one night. The watching can resume tomorrow if you want it to. Tonight, someone else has it. In peace, lie down. In peace, sleep. The keeping is not yours tonight. Consider the first night the shepherd actually slept on purpose. The story does not tell it, but you can imagine it well enough. He would have lain down against the stone wall the way he always did, and then, deliberately, let his back slide down until he was flat. He would have looked up at the sky for a while. He would have listened, out of habit, for a sound in the scrub. And then, at some point, without deciding to, he would have stopped listening. He probably woke several times that night. New habits do not arrive whole, but he woke into a world that was exactly as he had left it. The animals were in the pen. The night was doing what nights do. Nothing had required his attention while he was gone. And in the morning, he would have counted the flock, the way he did every morning, and the number would have been right. That is how the sentence eventually got written, not in a moment of insight. over hundreds of ordinary mornings when the count came out right, and he had not been the reason. There is another story that points to the same safety. There is a story in the older scriptures about people who woke up every morning to find food on the ground, and who were told very clearly not to save any of it. They were a large group of people walking through dry country. They had left the place where they had been living, and they were between one life and another, and the journey was taking much longer than anyone had expected. There was no farming, there were no markets, there was nothing growing where they were. So each morning, something appeared. The old text describes it as a fine flaky thing, like frost on the ground, that arrived overnight with the dew. They did not have a name for it. They asked each other what it was, and the phrase they used became the name, manna, which means, roughly, what is it? Consider what those years were actually like, in between the famous events. Mostly they were walking. Mostly they were setting up shelters and taking them down again. Mostly they were managing children and animals and old people across country with very little water in it. The story compresses 40 years into a few chapters, which makes it sound eventful. It was not eventful. It was a very long time in which almost nothing happened, punctuated by a small number of things that got written down. That is what most difficult periods are actually like from the inside. Long stretches of ordinary logistics, and a provision that arrives every morning without comment so reliably that people stop being amazed by it within a few weeks and start complaining about the taste. Observe that the complaining is in the story too. The text does not hide it. People got tired of the manna. They talked about the food they used to have. They were, in other words, entirely normal, and the provision continued anyway, uninterrupted, for 4 decades. Consider the ordinariness of the routine that developed around it. People woke up. They stepped out of their tents in the early light. There was a fine white layer on the ground between the shelters, thin as frost, gone patchy where people had already walked. Children were sent out with cloths. Old women bent slowly with small baskets. Nobody made a ceremony of it. It was breakfast. The instruction was simple. Go out in the morning. Gather enough for today. That is all. And every morning, people went out with baskets and gathered and came back and ate. Some gathered more, some gathered less, depending on how strong they were and how many mouths they were feeding. But the story says that when they measured it out at home, everyone had exactly enough. Nobody had too much. Nobody went hungry. The people who had gathered slowly were not short. And then came the part that people did not like. They were told not to keep any of it overnight. Consider how unreasonable that instruction must have sounded to them. These were not careless people. They were people crossing a wilderness with children and elderly relatives, people who had already been walking for a long time and did not know how much longer it would be. Every instinct any of them had would have said, store some, keep a little back. What if tomorrow it simply does not come? So of course, some of them tried. The story says a few kept some in their tents, overnight, quietly, sensibly, the way almost any of us would have, and in the morning, the saved portion had spoiled. It had bred worms and gone sour, and could not be eaten by anyone. But the fresh manna was there again on the ground outside, as it had been the day before, as it would be again the next day and the day after that. Notice what that arrangement actually taught them. It did not teach them that saving is wrong. It is not a story about thrift. It taught them something narrower and stranger. It taught them that tomorrow's provision could not be gathered today, that it did not exist yet. that the only portion available to them at any moment was the one for the day they were actually in. This may be the most useful thing in the scriptures for a person lying awake at 2 in the morning. It is not a comfort about the future. It is a description of how time actually works and how provision moves through it. Because gathering tomorrow's manna tonight is exactly what the anxious mind is attempting at this hour. It is out in the dark with a basket, trying to collect the strength, the answers, the resources, the certainty for a day that has not arrived yet. And it cannot be done, not because you are doing it badly, not because you lack discipline, because the portion is not there yet. There is nothing on the ground to pick up. Consider the specific things your mind has been reaching for tonight. The conversation you will have to have, the appointment, the bill, the decision you have been circling for weeks. Notice that in every single case, what you are actually trying to gather is not information. It is capacity. You are trying to feel, right now, at this hour, the strength you will need at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. That strength is real, it exists, but it belongs to tomorrow morning, and it is not on the ground yet. You cannot pick it up at this hour, no matter how long you stay awake trying to, and every hour you spend trying to gather it is an hour taken directly from the rest that would have made receiving it easier. That is the cruel arithmetic of the anxious night, and it is worth naming plainly. The gathering does not work, and the gathering costs you the exact thing that would have helped. The mind is trading its own rest for a portion that cannot be picked up until morning. There is a mercy hidden in that. If you cannot gather tomorrow's portion tonight, then you are not failing by not having it. You are simply early. You have arrived at the field before the food has been laid down. That is not a character flaw. That is a timing issue, and it resolves itself in a few hours without any effort from you. Consider the people in the story who did save some. They were not punished for it. Nothing happened to them. The spoiled portion in their tent was not a penalty from anyone. It was information. It simply demonstrated, quietly, that the thing does not keep. And then they walked outside, and there was fresh manna on the ground, and they ate breakfast like everyone else in the camp. You may have spent a great many nights trying to store manna. Most people have. It does not disqualify you from anything. The morning came anyway, and the portion was there, and you have eaten every single day of your life so far, one way or another. That is not luck, that is the arrangement. There is a line in the same tradition from much later that comes directly out of this. Give us this day our daily bread, not this week's bread, not this year's, today's. It is a small request, and it is small on purpose. It asks for a single day at a time, because that is the size of portion a human being can actually hold without dropping it. It is worth noticing how many people have said that line while lying awake. It has been said in hospital corridors, in kitchens, at 4 in the morning, in the back of churches by people who could not have explained why they had come. Always the same size request, always one day. Notice also that the manna came in the dark. It arrived overnight with the dew, while the entire camp was asleep. Nobody watched it appear. Nobody helped. No one was assigned to supervise the process. The provision was made during the exact hours when every single person who depended on it was unconscious. That is the picture to carry into your own night. Something is being prepared while you sleep, not by you, not with your involvement or your approval. The morning's portion is being laid down quietly on the ground outside, in the dark, without anyone checking whether you are awake to see it happen. Consider how much of your life has arrived that way. The good things you did not arrange, the help that came from a direction you were not watching, the strength that showed up on a morning you had been dreading for weeks. You did not manufacture any of it. It was on the ground when you got there. That is grace in its most ordinary form, not a dramatic rescue. Only a thin white layer on the ground outside the tent. Most mornings, for a very long time, quietly renewing itself while everyone slept. You have been held by that kind of grace more often than you have noticed it. There is a grace in a system built that way. It means the getting of what you need is not a function of your vigilance. It means the tired and the rested wake up to the same ground. The people who worried all night and the people who slept soundly walked out of their tents into the same morning and found exactly the same thing waiting for them. That is a strange kind of grace to sit with. It does not reward the effort. It does not give a larger portion to the one who stayed awake, caring more. It simply lies on the ground for everyone, in the amount each person needs, as though the whole system had been designed by someone who did not want anyone to have to earn breakfast. Feel the ground outside your tent in your imagination. Feel the cool air of the desert night on your face. Feel the quiet of a whole camp asleep around you. Hundreds of small shelters with people breathing inside them. Nobody keeping watch over the food supply because there is no food supply to keep watch over. Only ground, only dew, only the coming morning. Feel the basket sitting empty by the door of the tent. It does not need to be filled tonight. It cannot be. It is a morning object. Let it sit there in the dark where it belongs. Notice, if you can, the small physical relief of putting down something you were never able to carry in the first place, not choosing to put it down. Discovering that it was never actually in your hands. That is a different sensation than letting go. It is closer to finding out you were not holding anything. You are held tonight inside an arrangement older than you, in which the portion arrives daily, in the dark, without your help and without your permission. Tomorrow's strength is not missing. It is simply not yet. It will be on the ground when you need it, in the amount you need, the way it has been every other morning of your life. Let yourself rest inside that arrangement. You are held by it whether or not you can feel it working. It has been working since long before you were told about it. Consider one exception built into the arrangement. On the 6th day, they were told to gather twice as much because the 7th day was a day of rest and there would be nothing on the ground. And on that one occasion, the saved portion did not spoil. It kept perfectly overnight. Notice what that means. The manna could keep. It was entirely capable of lasting until morning. It simply did not on the ordinary days, because the arrangement was not primarily about food. It was about teaching a large group of anxious people over a period of years that the provision was reliable, and the exception was made for rest. The only time they were allowed to store was so that they could stop working for a day. That is a small and easily missed detail in a very old story, but it tells you what the whole system was oriented toward. Not scarcity, not testing. Rest. The gathering was arranged so that at least one day a week, nobody had to gather anything. Let tonight be tonight. Let the basket be empty. The manna comes with the dew, and the dew comes near morning, and you do not have to be awake for either one. There is another story that points to the same provision. There is a story sometimes told about a boy who could not sleep, and a grandmother who did not try to fix it. Nobody remembers his name. Nobody remembers the town. It is the kind of story that lives in families rather than in books, and gets told to children who are lying awake, by adults who were once children lying awake themselves. The boy was 7 or 8. He had come to stay with his grandmother for a summer because something was happening at home that the adults were not explaining. He did not know exactly what it was. He only knew that his mother's voice had changed on the telephone, and that he had been sent away, and that everyone kept saying it would only be for a little while. He was not a fearful child during the day. He played outside. He ate what he was given. He helped carry things. He did not complain. But at night, in the small back bedroom of his grandmother's house, he could not sleep. His mind would start as soon as the light went out. It would go through everything he had noticed and had not been told. The way his father had stopped coming to dinner, the word he had overheard through the kitchen door, the way his aunt had looked at him at the station. He would lie there in the dark assembling it, over and over, trying to make the pieces into a picture that made sense. He did not tell his grandmother any of this. Children rarely do. He only came out of his room several nights in a row and stood in the hallway and said he could not sleep. The first night, she made him warm milk. It did not work. The second night, she sat with him for a while and asked him what was wrong, and he said nothing because he did not have the words. The third night, she tried telling him a story she had made up, and he lay there politely and did not sleep. On the fourth night, she came into the room with an old book under her arm. It was a Bible. It was very worn. The cover had come loose from the binding, and there was a rubber band around it to keep it together. The boy's heart sank a little. He assumed he was about to be taught something. He assumed there would be a lesson and a question at the end of it, and a moral he was supposed to carry into his sleep. She pulled the small chair from the corner over to the side of the bed and sat down. She said, "You do not have to listen to this. You do not have to understand it. I am not going to ask you anything about it in the morning. I am only going to read." Then she opened the book, somewhere in the middle, and began. She read slowly. She did not explain the words. She did not stop to say what anything meant. When she came to a name he did not know, she simply said it and kept going. When she came to a sentence that would have taken an hour to explain, she read it and moved on without comment. She read the way you would read to someone who is not really listening, because she knew perfectly well that he was not really listening, and that this was the entire point. The boy lay in the dark. At first, his mind kept working. It was still assembling the picture of what was wrong at home, still turning the fragments over. But now there was something else in the room with it. There was a voice, an old, unhurried voice, saying words in an order he did not have to follow. He heard fragments. Something about a valley, something about water, something about a man who went out to a field in the evening to think, something about not being afraid, though he did not catch what came after it. The words went over him without going into him, and gradually, without his noticing it happening, the assembling in his mind slowed down. He did not remember falling asleep. He only remembered waking up in the morning with the light on the wall and the chair back in its corner, and the book gone from the room. She did this every night for the rest of the summer. She never asked him what he had heard. She never quizzed him about it. She never used it as an opportunity to teach him anything, or to reassure him about home, or to explain what the adults had not explained. She simply came in, sat down, and read in a low voice for 20 minutes, and left when his breathing changed. Years later, when he was a grown man with children of his own, he told someone about it. He said the strange part was that he could not remember a single thing she had read to him, not one story, not one verse. He had absorbed nothing at all. And then he said, "But I remember what the room felt like." That is the whole story. Notice what the grandmother understood that most adults do not. She understood that the boy did not need information. He had plenty of information. He was drowning in fragments of information he could not assemble. What he needed was something else entirely. He needed the room to feel occupied. That is a very old use of the scriptures, and it may well be the oldest one. Before most people could read, the words were something you heard rather than something you studied. They were spoken over you in a room by someone else's voice. They were read aloud in houses, in fields, at gravesides, over sick children. They were not primarily a text to be understood. They were a sound that meant someone was there. Consider how many centuries that went on. In most of human history, almost nobody owned a book. The words reached people through the air, in the voice of a neighbor or a parent or an old man at the front of a room, and most of the people hearing them could not have repeated a single line back correctly. It did not matter. The words were not being transmitted. They were being poured over a room. There is a grace in being read to that has nothing to do with comprehension. Any parent knows it. Any nurse who has sat with a dying patient knows it. The words are doing something, but the something is not education. The words are a kind of company. They are proof that the room is not empty. Proof that whoever is in it with you is in no hurry to leave. That is a grace most adults have quietly lost access to, not because it was taken from them, because at some point they decided words were only useful if they meant something. And once words have to mean something, they stop being able to simply fill a room. You may notice that this is exactly what is happening to you right now. You are not being taught tonight. There will be no question in the morning. You do not have to remember any of these stories. If you have already forgotten the shepherd, or the ladder, or the manna, that is entirely fine. That is what is supposed to happen. That was always the plan. The words are not going into you. They are going over you. That is their job at this hour. Notice how much pressure comes off when you accept that. There is nothing to retain. There is no comprehension being asked of you. Nothing is being tested. You can let entire minutes pass without following anything at all, and nothing will have been lost because nothing was being deposited in the first place. Consider what the boy actually received that summer. Not doctrine, not answers about what was happening at home. He received 20 minutes a night of a room with someone in it, and a voice that was not in a hurry, and the knowledge that the reading would continue whether or not he was awake for it. Consider what the boy actually received that summer. Not doctrine, not answers about what was happening at home. Nothing that would have shown up on a test, or that he could have explained to anyone. He received 20 minutes a night of a room with someone in it, and a voice that was in no hurry, and the quiet knowledge that the reading would continue whether or not he was awake for it. That is what he remembered 50 years later, not the content, the occupancy. There is a peace available in being read to that most adults have not felt since childhood, because at some point we all decided that words were only worth hearing if we understood them. But you were read to before you could understand anything at all. That is the original form of it. Sound over a small body in a dark room, meaning nothing in particular, meaning everything. That kind of peace does not require your cooperation. It does not ask you to concentrate. It only asks you to stay lying down, and you are already doing that. Rest is easier when nothing is being required of you. Notice how little is being required right now. Feel the small chair by the side of the bed now in your imagination. Feel someone sitting in it unhurried, holding a worn book with a rubber band around the cover. Feel that they are not going to ask you anything. Feel that they will keep reading after you have stopped following. They are in no hurry. They have nowhere to be. Feel the words moving through the room like warm air, not addressed to your mind, addressed to the room itself. This is what peace sounds like when nobody is trying to produce it. You are held tonight the way a child is held by a voice in the dark. You do not have to understand what is being said. You do not have to remember it. You do not have to be awake for it. That was never the arrangement. There is a grace in that which asks nothing of you at all, nothing to follow, nothing to keep, only a room with someone in it, and a voice that will not stop when you do. Let the reading go on without you. That is what it is for. Rest and let the room stay occupied. Consider what happened when the summer ended. He went home. Whatever had been happening there had resolved into something, not well, but into something, and life continued in the way that it does. Nobody read to him at night anymore. He went back to school. He grew up. And for the rest of his life, when he could not sleep, he would put on a radio. Not for the content. He never listened to what was being said. He simply needed a voice in the room, unhurried, going on without him. He did not connect the two things until he was in his 50s, and someone asked him why he slept with the radio on, and he said, without meaning to say it, because my grandmother used to read to me. See how long the effect lasted. 40 years of a small habit, traced back to 20 minutes a night for one summer, from an old woman who almost certainly thought she was not doing very much. You do not know what tonight is doing. That is not something anyone can assess at 2 a.m. It is only something that turns out to have been true much later, when someone asks you an ordinary question. There is another story that points to the same company. There is a story in the older scriptures about a woman who was not from there, working in a field that did not belong to her, and the sentence a stranger said to her at the end of a long day. Her name was Ruth. She was a foreigner. She had married into a family from another country, and then the men of that family had died, one after another, over a period of years. She was left with her mother-in-law, an older woman named Naomi, who had also lost everyone. The two of them decided to go back to Naomi's hometown. It was a long walk. When they arrived, they had nothing. No land, no income, no men to work on their behalf, which in that century meant no standing at all. So Ruth did what poor people did in that country. She went out to glean. Consider the law itself for a moment, because it is unusual. In most agricultural societies, the harvest belongs entirely to whoever owns the field. Here, a portion of it was legally reserved for people who owned nothing, and the owner was forbidden from going back for it. Look at how it was designed. It was not a donation. Nobody had to feel generous. Nobody had to be asked. The poor did not have to present themselves at anyone's door and explain their situation. They simply walked into the field and worked. That is a remarkably dignified piece of legislation for a document that old. It anticipated that people would need help, and it arranged the help so that receiving it did not require humiliation. Gleaning was the arrangement for people with nothing. When a field was harvested, the workers were told to leave the edges uncut and to leave behind anything they dropped. The poor could walk through afterward and pick up what remained. It was not charity exactly. It was a law, a gap deliberately built into the harvest so that people with no field of their own would not starve. Consider what that work was actually like. You walk behind other people who have already taken the good part. You bend over all day in the heat. You pick up single stalks one at a time from ground that has already been picked over. Your back does not stop hurting from about the 3rd hour onward. You carry a small bundle home at evening, and that is your food for the day. And everyone in the field knows exactly what your situation is, because only people in your situation are doing what you are doing. There is a particular kind of tiredness in work like that. It is not the tiredness of hard labor. It is the tiredness of visible need, of doing something in front of other people that announces exactly how little you have. Ruth did this in a field belonging to a man named Boaz. She did not know who he was. She had simply gone out that morning and walked to whatever field she came to first, which is what people do when they have no plan and no options and have to eat that night. At some point in the morning, Boaz came out to see his workers. He noticed her. He asked the foreman who she was. The foreman explained. She is the foreigner who came back with Naomi, and she asked permission to glean, and she has been at it since morning without resting. And Boaz walked over to her. Notice what he did not say. He did not say, "You should not be here." He did not say, "This is difficult work for a woman on her own." He did not offer her a lecture on hard times or ask her how she had ended up in this position. He said, "Stay in my field. Do not go to any other one. Keep close to my workers. I have told the men not to bother you. And when you are thirsty, drink from the jars my own people drink from." Then he said the sentence that has stayed in the language. He said, "May you be repaid for what you have done. May you receive a full reward from the Lord, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Under whose wings you have come to take refuge. That is a strange image for a farmer to reach for on a hot morning in a barley field. It is an image from birds. A hen, or any bird that nests on the ground, spreads her wings out low and flat when there is danger, and the young go underneath, and the wings close over them. It is not an elaborate protection. There is no wall, there is no height. There is only a warm, dark space and a body between the small thing and the sky. Consider how little that actually is, as protection goes. A wing is thin. A wing could not stop very much, and yet every ground-nesting bird in the world has been raising its young that way, for as long as there have been birds, and it works, and the young go quiet underneath, and they sleep. Consider who he is saying this to. A woman with no legal standing, no property, no protector, no citizenship in that country, no way to earn anything except by bending over in other people's fields. By every measure that mattered in that world, she was as unprotected as a person could be. And he tells her she has come under wings. Notice that he does not say she will come under them if things work out. He says she has come, past tense, already. In the middle of a life that had gone very badly, while she was bent over in a field picking up dropped grain, she was already underneath something. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes at night, and it is not the loneliness of having no one in the house. It is the loneliness of feeling structurally unprotected, of feeling that there is nothing at all between you and whatever is coming, that everyone else seems to have some arrangement, some backing, some margin of safety, and you are the one standing out in the open. If you have felt that lately, this old sentence was written for you. It does not say your situation will change. Boaz did not fix Ruth's life that morning. She still had to go back out and glean. She still went home that night to a house with 2 poor women in it and no security whatsoever. Nothing in her circumstances was different at sundown than it had been at sunrise. What changed was the description. Someone told her what was actually true about the place where she was standing. She was not out in the open. She was under wings, she had been for some time. She simply had not known it, because a wing does not look like a wall, and refuge does not always feel like relief. That is worth sitting with. There is a peace that comes from a correct description, even when nothing has been fixed. A great deal of what keeps people awake is not the situation itself, but an inaccurate account of how exposed they are inside it. Grace often arrives first as information. Someone tells you where you actually are, and you can finally rest, not because the field got safer, but because you found out what was over you. Consider also how ordinary the mechanism of her protection was. It was not a miracle. Nothing supernatural happened in that field. It was a law about the edges of harvested fields. It was a man who noticed a stranger working since morning and told his workers to leave her alone. It was permission to drink from the water jars. Small, dull, practical things. That is how the wings usually work, not dramatically. Through the edges of fields, through someone deciding to be decent on an ordinary Tuesday. Through a system that had a gap deliberately built into it, centuries before you needed the gap, by people who would never meet you. That is grace in its most common form, not the spectacular kind, the structural kind. Arrangements made long ago by someone who anticipated that a person like you would come along eventually and need somewhere to walk. You have been living inside arrangements like that your whole life without noticing them. Roads that were built before you were born. Kindnesses from people who forgot they gave them. Rules that protect you which you have never once had to invoke because they worked quietly in the background. Medicines discovered by strangers who died before you existed. The wings are mostly invisible. That does not make them absent. Notice how the anxious mind at this hour insists on scanning for the wall. It wants a guarantee it can look at. It wants to see the whole structure and verify each part of it. And there is no wall to find, so the scanning simply continues all night without ever reaching a conclusion. But you were never promised a wall. You were told about wings, which means warmth and darkness and a body between you and the sky, and no visibility at all from underneath. That is what tonight is. You cannot see the structure. You are underneath it. Those are the same thing. Feel the field at evening now in your imagination. Feel the day's work ending around you. Feel the small bundle of grain tied with a cord sitting on the ground beside you. Feel the last heat coming off the earth and the first coolness arriving with the shadows. Feel the long walk home ahead of you and the deep tiredness in your back and shoulders. And feel the sentence said over you in the middle of that day by someone who had no obligation to say anything at all. You have come to take refuge under wings. Not you might, not you will, you have. Feel the wings now, not as an idea to agree with, as a shape over you in the dark, low and warm and wide enough. Nothing visible, nothing to verify, only the fact that the sky is not touching you. You are held tonight by a grace that arranged the edges of the field long before you ever walked into it. It does not require you to understand the arrangement. It does not require you to feel protected or to be able to name what is protecting you. It only requires you to stay where you are and stop scanning the horizon and rest under the warmth. Rest is easier under wings than under open sky. That is the whole of what this old story is offering you. Not a change in your circumstances, a correction to your description of them. There is peace in being covered by something you cannot see. It is the oldest kind of peace there is. It is the kind that small animals sleep in every night of their lives without a single thought about it. They do not verify the wing. They simply go quiet underneath it. Come under the wings tonight. You are already there. You have been there for longer than you know. Consider how that day ended for her. She worked until evening. She beat out what she had gathered, which was a surprising amount because Boaz had quietly told his men to pull extra stalks out of the bundles and leave them on the ground for her to find. She did not know that. She only knew that the gleaning had gone unusually well. She carried it home. Naomi saw the quantity and asked immediately where she had been working, because that much grain does not come from an ordinary day of gleaning. Ruth told her the name of the field, and the old woman sat down. That is the detail the story keeps. Naomi sat down because she recognized the name and understood something about their situation that Ruth could not have understood, being a foreigner. The protection had been in place all day, structurally, legally, and neither of the women had known it that morning. Notice how much of the good in that story was invisible to the person receiving it. Extra stalks left on purpose. Instructions given to workers she never spoke to. A legal relationship she did not know existed. She walked home tired, carrying a heavy bundle, with no idea how much had been arranged around her. You may be walking home tired tonight in the same condition, not knowing what has been arranged, not knowing which stalks were left on the ground deliberately. There is another story that points to the same covering. There is a small detail in one of the later books of the scriptures that most people read straight past. It is not the miracle in the story. It is one clause, almost thrown away, describing what a man was doing on the night before the hardest day of his life. He was asleep. His name was Peter. He was one of the fishermen who had followed the teacher years earlier from a lake in the north. By this point in the story, he was older. He had been through a great deal. He had made mistakes that had become famous and would stay famous for 2,000 years. He had been forgiven for them in a quiet conversation on a beach one morning, over a small fire, and he never fully got over having been forgiven that easily. And now he was being held. There had been arrests in the city that week. He was in custody, waiting for the authorities to decide what to do with him in the morning. The situation was serious. Everyone around him understood exactly how serious it was. The community he belonged to had gathered in a house across the city and was staying up through the night praying for him. And Peter, in the room where he was being kept, was asleep. The text says it very plainly, almost in passing, as though it were an unimportant detail. He was sleeping between two guards, bound with chains, and an angel came and struck him on the side to wake him up. Notice that detail. The angel had to hit him. Not gently shake him, not call his name softly the way a name was once called to a boy in a dark sanctuary. The messenger of God arrived in the middle of the night, in the middle of a rescue already underway, and had to physically strike this man on the side to get him to open his eyes. That is not the sleep of someone dozing lightly. That is the sleep of someone deeply, thoroughly gone. Consider what he had to be sleeping through in order for that to be necessary. Chains on his wrists, heavy enough to feel with every movement. Guards on either side of him, close enough to touch. A stone floor, bad light, unfamiliar noises. And underneath all of it, the knowledge that in the morning there would be a hearing, and that the last person in his position had not come back from it. Any reasonable person would have been awake. Any reasonable person would have spent that night going over what they would say, rehearsing arguments, calculating outcomes, praying frantically, bargaining with heaven in the dark. He was asleep so deeply that a supernatural being had to use force. There is something in that which is worth carrying into your own room tonight. Because you have almost certainly had the other kind of night. The one where the hearing is tomorrow, where the conversation is tomorrow, where the result comes tomorrow, where the appointment is at 9 and it is currently 2, and where the mind stays up all night preparing for something it cannot actually prepare for, running the conversation forward, running it backward, trying different opening sentences, imagining the worst version and then arguing with it, building a case nobody will ever hear, and then arriving in the morning exhausted, which is the one condition guaranteed to make the day worse than it needed to be. Peter did not do that, and the story does not present his sleep as a failure of seriousness, or as denial, or as spiritual showing off. It presents it quietly, almost without comment, as the most striking thing in the room. Consider how a person gets to that. It is not natural confidence. Peter was not a calm man by temperament. Everything else we know about him suggests the opposite. He was impulsive. He spoke first and thought afterward. He panicked in a boat once, badly, in front of everyone he knew. He made a promise he could not keep and then broke it 3 times before morning. He was not built for composure. Something had happened to him over the years that had changed the way he slept. Notice what it was not. It was not certainty about the outcome. He had no idea what would happen in the morning. Nobody had told him. No angel had been announced in advance. He lay down that night genuinely not knowing whether he would be alive at the end of the next day. So the sleep did not come from knowing how it would end. It came from somewhere else entirely. It came, as far as anyone can tell, from having stopped believing that his own vigilance was load-bearing. He had been through enough by then to know that outcomes had never once depended on how alert he had been the night before. He had tried the other approach. He had stayed awake. He had rehearsed. It had not helped. And once, on the night when it mattered most, all of his preparation had collapsed anyway, and he had failed in the way he most feared failing, and had been forgiven for it afterward on a beach in the morning light. That is what changes how a person sleeps, not success, being carried through the failure, being held on the worst day, and discovering that the holding did not depend on your performance. That is the grace underneath this whole story, and it is why the sleeping detail is in the text at all. A man who has been carried once stops believing he is the one doing the carrying, and a man who has stopped believing that can sleep in a room with chains on. So he had learned, slowly over many years, to put it down at night, to let the night be the night, to rest before the day he could not control, rather than only after it. That is not a personality trait. That is a practice, and a practice is something that can be learned by anyone, including you, including tonight, including badly at first. There is a specific quality to that kind of sleep that the story captures well. It is not peaceful in the sense of being pleasant. The room was not pleasant. There was nothing comfortable about any of it. It is peaceful in the sense of being complete. The whole self, off duty. Nothing left running in the background to monitor the situation. Notice how rarely you have slept that way in the last year. Most people's sleep now has a small process running behind it. Half awake, half monitoring, ready to be needed at any moment. Listening for the phone, listening for the child, listening for the sound of the thing they are afraid of. That is not really sleep, that is standby. Peter's sleep had none of that in it. He was so far gone that a messenger sent specifically to rescue him had to physically strike him to begin the rescue. The rescuer had to interrupt the sleep because the sleep was not going to interrupt itself. Consider also what was happening while he slept. The community across the city was awake and praying for him by name. The angel was already on its way. The chains were about to fall off his wrists. An entire operation was underway on his behalf, involving several parties, and he knew nothing about any of it because he was unconscious. That is the part to hold on to. Everything that mattered that night happened while he was asleep. His participation was not required at any point. His awareness contributed nothing. The rescue proceeded without his supervision, and would have proceeded in exactly the same way if he had stayed asleep another hour. There is a grace in that arrangement which is difficult for a certain kind of mind to accept. It means your involvement is optional, not your effort in daylight, your monitoring at night. The night shift, it turns out, is fully staffed without you. That is a hard grace to receive if you have built your sense of responsibility around being the one who stays alert. It can feel like being told you do not matter. It is not that. It is being told that the mattering does not happen through sleeplessness. Those are different things, and at 2 a.m, the mind confuses them constantly. You may be lying awake in your own version of that room right now. Not chains, but something. A day coming that you cannot control. A conversation, a result, a number you are waiting for. A person whose situation you cannot fix from your bed. The story does not tell you it will go well. It does not promise the chains fall off for everyone. That would be a lie, and this old book is not in the habit of telling that particular one. It only shows you a man who slept through the night before, and who woke up, and who found that things had been happening in his favor the entire time he was gone. Feel the room now, in your imagination, not the harshness of it, only the dark, and the cool stone, and the 2 sleeping guards, and a man in the middle who has genuinely stopped keeping watch over his own life for a few hours. Feel how heavy that sleep is. Feel the weight of a body that has fully committed to being unconscious. Feel the total absence of preparation happening in that room. Nothing is being rehearsed. Nothing is being calculated. There is only breathing. Feel that you are permitted the same thing tonight. Not because tomorrow is guaranteed, because your watching does not change tomorrow, and never has, and the only thing it reliably changes is how tired you are when tomorrow finally arrives. You are held tonight by whatever was already moving across the city while that man slept. It does not need your attention. It does not need you awake. It does not need you to have understood the plan, or approved it, or even believed there was one. Rest the way he rested, deeply enough that waking would require effort. Rest without preparing. Rest without rehearsing. There is nothing you can do at this hour that will help, and there is a great deal being done that has nothing to do with you. Consider what happened after the angel struck him. The story tells it almost comically. The chains fell off his hands. He was told to get dressed, and to put on his sandals, and to follow. And he did all of it in a daze, thinking he was having a vision, not believing any of it was actually occurring. They walked past the first guard post, then the second, then out through a gate that opened on its own, and then, in the street, alone, the angel was gone. And Peter stood there in the cold air and finally understood that he was actually outside. Notice how much of the rescue he slept through, and how much of the rest of it he did not understand while it was happening. He was awake for almost none of the important part, and confused for the rest of it, and it worked anyway. That is worth carrying into a night when you feel like you are not participating well in your own life. Peter did not participate well. He was asleep for the setup, and bewildered through the execution. And the story is still told about him 2,000 years later. Let the chains be tomorrow's problem. They have never once been a 2 in the morning problem. There is another story that points to the same piece. There is a story sometimes told about an old fisherman on a cold coast and a piece of paper he carried in his pocket for 40 years. Nobody remembers his name. The story comes from a fishing village somewhere north, the kind of place where the water is gray most of the year and the boats go out before light. It is the sort of story that gets told in those villages about men who are already dead, in the winter when there is nothing else to do. It has been told badly and told well. This is one of the versions. He had gone out on the boats since he was 12. His father had, and his grandfather had. It was not a choice anyone made. It was simply what the men in that village did, and the women mended the nets and salted the catch, and everybody worked from dark to dark and did not complain about it. When he was 19, something happened that the story does not describe in detail. A boat went down, not his. He was on shore that week with a broken hand. Men he had known his whole life did not come back, and the sea was too rough for days afterward for anyone to look properly. After that, he stopped being able to sleep the night before going out. He did not talk about it. Men in that village did not talk about such things. He simply lay awake on the nights before a trip, listening to the wind against the shutters, and got up at 4 and went down to the harbor with everyone else and did his work as well as he had ever done it. This went on for 2 years. Then one winter, the parish priest, a very ordinary man with no particular gifts, gave him something. It was not advice. The priest was not good at advice, and he knew it. It was a small piece of paper, folded twice, with a few lines copied onto it, in the priest's own careful handwriting. He said, "I do not know if this helps. Keep it in your coat." That was the entire intervention. No conversation about grief. No explanation of what the lines meant. No follow-up question the next Sunday. A folded paper and one sentence. The lines were from one of the old songs. They were about the sea, as it happens, though the priest may not have chosen them for that reason at all. They said something like this: "If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me." The fisherman put the paper in the inside pocket of his coat, and that is where it stayed for the next 40 years. Here's the part of the story that people remember. He did not read it. Not never. He read it a few times in the first weeks. He knew roughly what it said. But he was not a reader. The words were small. The light in the house was poor. And after a long day at sea, nobody wants to squint at handwriting. What he did instead was touch it. On the nights he could not sleep, he would put his hand on the coat hanging by the door, or on the pocket if the coat was folded over the back of the chair, and he would feel the small square of folded paper through the wool. That was all. He did not take it out. He did not unfold it. He did not say the words to himself. He simply touched the place where they were and left his hand there for a moment. And slowly, over months, he began to sleep again before the trips. His wife noticed before he did. She said to him once, over supper, "You sleep now." He said, "I suppose I do." She asked what had changed. He thought about it for a long while and said he did not know. He carried that paper until he was an old man. By the end, it had gone soft as cloth from being touched so many thousands of times, and the ink had almost entirely faded, and the folds had worn through so that it came apart in 4 pieces if you were not careful with it. He kept the 4 pieces in the same pocket. When he died, his daughter found them in the coat. She could not read what they said. The ink was gone. She kept them anyway. That is the whole story. Consider what actually happened there. He did not memorize scripture. He did not study it. He could not have told you what book the lines came from, or what the whole song said, or anything at all about the man who wrote it 3,000 years earlier. By any measure of religious education, he knew almost nothing. And yet something in him settled for 40 years because of a piece of paper in a coat. Notice how that works. The words were not doing their job through his understanding. They were doing it through his hand. There is a kind of faith that lives below the level of thought. Most people have some of it. Most people do not know what to call it. It is the reason someone keeps a photograph in a wallet they never open. It is the reason a child carries one particular blanket and not another. It is not superstition, exactly. It is the mind using an object to hold a truth it cannot keep hold of on its own at 3 a.m. Notice that this is not a lesser form of faith. It is only an older one. It was the normal form for most of human history, among people who could not read, in centuries when the words lived in objects and songs and repeated phrases rather than in private study. The fisherman could not, at 2 a.m, in a cold room, with the wind coming off the water, produce in himself a conviction that he was held. Nobody can do that on demand. Nobody has ever been able to. But he could reach out and touch a piece of paper, and the paper had the conviction stored inside it, waiting. That is a legitimate use of the old words, possibly the most common one in all of history. Consider the phrase on the paper, "Even there your hand shall hold me," not "even there I will feel held," not "even there I will believe correctly," not "even there I will have the right attitude about it." The claim is about the hand, not about the person's experience of the hand. Which means it does not stop being true on the nights you cannot feel it. That is the entire point of the sentence, and it is why it was written down in the first place. It is a statement about a hand, made in advance, in daylight, by someone who knew that it would need to be available on nights when the feeling had gone. Consider the daughter for a moment. She was going through her father's things, the way people do in the week after a death, when there is too much to feel, and so you sort objects instead. She found the coat. She checked the pockets, because you always check the pockets. And she found 4 soft pieces of paper with no writing left on them. She did not know what they were. She could have thrown them out, and nobody would ever have known. Instead, she stood in the cold house holding them, and understood, without being told, that they had mattered. You can tell. An object that has been touched 40,000 times looks different from an object that has been kept. She put them in her own pocket. The story does not say what she did after that, and it does not need to. Notice how the words kept working after they had become unreadable. Notice that the ink was entirely gone, and the paper still did its job one more time for one more person on a bad afternoon. That is what those old lines are for. They were composed by people who had bad nights. They were written for the use of people who would have bad nights later. They are not descriptions of a mood. They are things left behind on purpose. The way you leave a lamp on for someone coming home late. You may not have a piece of paper in a coat, but you may have something. A line you heard once and never forgot. A phrase your grandmother said at the end of the day. A few words that have stayed with you for years. Words you could not defend to anyone who asked why. You do not have to understand it tonight. You do not have to believe it in any active way. You do not have to work up a feeling about it. You do not have to decide whether it is true. You can simply put your hand on it, the way that man put his hand on his coat, and let the words hold what you cannot hold yourself at this hour. There is a grace in being allowed to be that simple about it. Most people at this hour are far too tired for real faith, the articulate kind, the kind with reasons and structure. That is fine. That has always been fine. The fisherman had none of that either. He had a folded square of paper and a rough hand and 40 years of sleeping. Notice how little the grace required of him. It did not require literacy. It did not require understanding. It did not require him to be able to explain a single thing to anyone. It only required a coat and a pocket and a hand that knew where to go in the dark. Feel the coat by the door now in your imagination. Feel the weight of the wool. Feel the small hardness of folded paper in the inside pocket. Feel your fingers finding it in the dark. You do not need to look. The hand knows. Feel the wind outside. Feel the cold. Feel the boat that will go out in 4 hours. And feel the paper doing its quiet work through the fabric, the way it did for 40 years, without ever once being read. You are held tonight by a hand that does not require you to feel it. That is what the words on the paper actually said. Even at the farthest limits of the sea, even in the dark, even when the feeling has gone entirely. That is a grace with no conditions attached to it. It does not check whether you have been paying attention. It does not verify your understanding. It works through wool and worn paper and 40 years of a rough hand in the dark. Rest with your hand on whatever you have. Rest without producing any conviction. Rest without deciding anything. The peace does not come from understanding the words. It comes from the words being true, whether or not you are following them, whether or not you can feel them, whether or not you are awake. Consider what happened to the people those lines were written for. Some of them did go home eventually. Not all. Many died in the country they had been carried to, and their children went back in their place, to a city they had only heard described. The lines were not a prediction that everyone would be fine. They were something to hold during a long stretch when nothing was fine and nothing was moving. Observe that this is the most common use of anything comforting, not for the good ending, for the middle, for the years in between, when the situation has not resolved and shows no sign of resolving, and you have to keep getting up anyway. That is where you are tonight, most likely, not at a crisis, not at a resolution, somewhere in the flat middle of something, at an hour when the middle feels permanent. The lines were written exactly for that. They were written by someone who knew the middle would be the longest part. There is one last image before the night is done. There is a line in one of the old songs that was almost certainly written by someone who was looking at a bird while he wrote it. The song is about wanting to be somewhere. The writer is not in the place he loves. He is somewhere else, and he is homesick for a courtyard he cannot get to, and he says so plainly. And then, in the middle of all that longing, he notices something small. He says, "Even the sparrow has found a home, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young near your altars." That is the line, and it is worth slowing down on, because there is more in it than there appears to be. Consider what he is describing. A sparrow has built a nest inside the temple, not near it, not in a tree outside the gate. In the building itself, up in the beams somewhere, in the most carefully regulated space in that entire culture. That temple had rules about everything. Who could enter, how far in, what they had to do first, what they could carry with them, what condition they had to be in when they arrived. There were courtyards you could not cross without the right qualifications. There were rooms almost nobody entered, ever, in an entire lifetime. The whole architecture was a set of graded permissions built in stone, and everybody in that country understood exactly where they stood in it. And a sparrow had built a nest in it. Nobody had granted the sparrow permission. Nobody had examined the sparrow, or asked it questions, or checked what it had brought. The sparrow had not gone through any process at all. It had simply flown in through a high window one afternoon, found a beam that suited it, and started carrying twigs. Notice that the writer of the song does not find this scandalous. He finds it enviable. He is not saying, "Look at this violation, someone should do something." He is saying, "Look at that bird. It is closer to God than I am today, and it did not do a single thing to deserve it." There is something in that for anyone lying awake feeling like they have fallen outside the arrangement, because that is a specific kind of night thought, and a very common one. The sense that other people are inside something you are not inside, that there is a version of a good life or a spiritual life, or simply a settled ordinary life that has requirements you have not met and cannot now meet, that you are outside the courtyard, that the gate is closed for the night, that everyone who belongs is already asleep in there. The sparrow is the answer to that thought. Consider the sparrow's qualifications. It has none, none at all. It is a small brown bird of the most common possible kind. In that culture, sparrows were what poor people bought when they could not afford anything else to bring. 2 of them cost almost nothing. They were the least valuable creature that had a price at all. That bird, worth almost nothing, has built a nest in the holiest room in the country, and the songwriter looks up at it and says, "Well, there it is. There is the bird, inside." Notice also what the sparrow is doing up there. It is not worshiping. It is not participating in anything. It has no idea where it is. It is doing exactly what sparrows do everywhere, making a small untidy nest out of found material, raising young in it, being entirely unremarkable. And that is described in the song as being near the altar. There is a grace in that which is easy to miss because the bird is so small. It says the nearness is not a function of understanding. The sparrow does not know it is in a temple. It is in the temple anyway. You may have felt lately that you are not doing anything spiritual, that your life has become mostly logistics, meals and messages and small repairs, getting through the week. If you have felt a quiet embarrassment about that, the sparrow is your answer. The sparrow's entire spiritual life consists of gathering twigs. Consider how the nest gets built. A sparrow does not plan a nest. It does not have a drawing. It carries one piece of material at a time, over and over, for days. Nothing about the process looks like architecture while it is happening. It looks like a small bird carrying a piece of grass, then another one, then another. That is what most lives look like from inside them, one piece of grass at a time, no visible structure, nothing that resembles a plan. And then at some point there is a nest, and there are young in it, and it holds. Notice how quiet a nest in a temple beam must be at night. The building is empty. The lamps are low and burning down. There is nobody in the courtyards, nobody at the gates, none of the daytime traffic of people arriving with their offerings and their questions. And up in the dark of the roof, there is a small warm shape with its head tucked in, entirely unaware of the significance of its location. Consider what that bird has that the songwriter wanted. Not knowledge, not access, exactly. Only proximity, held without effort, through the night, while the whole building sleeps. That is a particular kind of peace, and it is the kind actually available to you at this hour. Not the peace of having resolved your standing with anything. The peace of being physically inside something larger than yourself, at night, with nothing required. That is what you are tonight. You do not have to understand where you are. You do not have to have earned the beam. You do not have to be awake for it, or grateful for it, or able to explain to anyone why you are allowed to be there. The sparrow is not doing any of that either. The sparrow is asleep in the roof of a building it will never comprehend, and nothing about its situation depends on comprehension. Notice how much of your life is like that already. You do not understand how your own heart keeps its rhythm. You did not arrange the atmosphere you are breathing. You are inside dozens of systems you could not explain and have never had to. Being inside something you do not understand is not an unusual position. It is the ordinary human position, and it has always been survivable, and most nights it is even comfortable. Feel the roof beams above you now in your imagination. Feel the height of the dark room and the low light somewhere far below, and the enormous quiet of a stone building at night with nobody in it. Feel the smallness of the nest. Feel how little material it took to make. Feel how ordinary the twigs are. Feel the warmth of the small body inside it, breathing slowly, taking up almost no space in the universe at all, and being entirely welcome to that space. You are held tonight in a place you did not qualify for. It was not a mistake that you got in. There is a grace in the architecture that has always let sparrows through the high windows and has never once sent one back out. Rest in the beam. Rest in the nest you have made out of whatever was lying around. Rest in the peace of being small and unnoticed and entirely, permanently inside. That peace does not require anything from you. It never has. Even the sparrow has found a home. So have you. You simply have not looked up. Consider the second bird in the line, which most people skip past entirely. The songwriter mentions a swallow as well, and he says something specific about her, a nest where she may lay her young. Notice that the sparrow gets a home, but the swallow gets a nursery. That is a step further than belonging. That is permanence. That is a bird raising a second generation in a building she wandered into, whose young will be born in the roof beams of a temple and will consider it entirely normal because they will have known nothing else. There is something in that for anyone who feels like a newcomer to their own life, to a job, to a marriage, to a country, to a version of themselves that still feels borrowed. The swallow did not become a citizen of the temple. She simply stayed long enough that her children were born inside it. Staying is its own kind of belonging. It does not require a ceremony. It only requires not leaving over a long enough period until one day the place is yours by simple occupancy. There is another story that points to the same belonging. There are a few lines in the older scriptures that were written for people who were a long way from home and did not expect to get back. They were written during an exile. A whole population had been moved by force to another country. They had been there long enough that children had been born there who had never seen the place their parents talked about. It was not a dramatic time. It was long. It was flat. It was discouraging in the way that long, flat things are. The kind of stretch where nothing terrible is happening on any particular day, and yet nothing is right. Into that, someone wrote these lines. They are addressed to a group, but they are written in the second person singular, which is to say, they are written to one person at a time. Do not be afraid, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers they shall not overwhelm you. Consider the strangeness of that promise. It does not say there will be no water. It says you will pass through it, and it will not close over you. The water is assumed. The water is part of the arrangement. What is promised is company inside the water, not the removal of the water, only company inside it. That is a promise built for people who already know that hard things happen. It is not for people expecting an easy life. It was written to exiles by someone who knew exactly who he was writing to. But the line that matters most tonight is the shortest one. I have called you by name. Consider how names work across a whole life. Your name was chosen for you before anyone knew who you would be. It was said over you when you were too small to hold your own head up. It was called across playgrounds. It was written at the top of papers. It has been said in anger and in affection and in every ordinary register in between by hundreds of people for decades. And underneath all of that, it has stayed the same sound, the same handful of syllables that meant you at 4 years old still mean you tonight. Almost nothing else about you has survived that intact. That is why the line uses a name rather than a description. Descriptions change. Roles end. The way people would characterize you now is not how they would have 20 years ago. A name is the only part that does not move. Consider what a name is. It is the first thing you were given. You did not choose it, and you did not earn it. Someone decided it before they met you, or shortly after, and then said it to you thousands of times before you could possibly understand what it meant. A name is the sound of being singled out. It is the difference between a crowd and a person. In a room full of noise, your name will cut through when nothing else does. That is not culture. That is how the brain is built. There is a part of you below thought that is always listening for it, even in sleep, even now. The line does not say, I have counted you. It does not say, I am aware of your general category. It says, I have called you by name, which means someone knows the specific sound that reaches you and has used it. Notice how much of the anxious mind at night is about the opposite of that. It is about feeling generic, feeling like one more person inside an enormous system that is not tracking anyone in particular, that nobody is holding your specific situation in mind because there are billions of situations, and yours is not remarkable enough to be one of the ones held. That is a very reasonable thing to feel at 3 a.m. It is the natural conclusion of a tired mind doing arithmetic about scale, and this line is the direct contradiction of it. There is a grace in that contradiction which does not depend on you believing it tonight. Grace of this kind is not a feeling you produce. It is a claim someone else has made about you, and it stays made whether or not you are in any condition to receive it. Consider also the phrase that follows, you are mine. That is not a phrase about ownership in the modern sense. In the old languages, it is much closer to belonging. It is what a family says about a child. It is what a shepherd says about an animal from his own flock when he sees it in someone else's field. It means you are accounted for. You are on someone's list. When things are counted, you are one of the things that gets counted. There is a great deal of comfort available in being accounted for. Most people underestimate it until they lose it. It is why being forgotten by an institution feels so much worse than being refused by one. Refusal at least implies you were seen. And it is why a person can rest in a strange bed, in a strange country, if they know that somebody at home is still counting them. Consider the shape of an ordinary week from the inside. You do a great many things nobody notices. You keep small promises nobody records. You get through afternoons that leave no trace anywhere. Most of a life is unwitnessed. That is not a complaint about anyone. It is simply the arithmetic of being one person among a very large number of people. And into that arithmetic, this old line drops a single claim. Somebody has your name, not your role, not your function, not the description of you that other people would give, the specific sound that has meant you since before you could speak. Notice that the promise about the water is stated in the past and future tense, but never in the imperative. Nothing is being asked of the person anywhere in it. There is no instruction, no behavior required, no condition attached to any part of it. It is entirely a set of statements about what someone else has done and will do. That is unusual, and it is worth noticing at this hour, when the tired mind is looking for something to do about its situation. There is nothing to do here. There is only something to be told. Consider how a parent speaks over a sleeping child. It is one of the few situations in human life where people say things with no expectation whatsoever of being heard. A parent stands in a doorway at 11 at night, looking at a child who has been asleep for 2 hours and says something quiet. Sometimes it is just the name. Sometimes it is a whole sentence. Sometimes it is an apology for something from that afternoon. The child will never know any of it was said. That is not the point of saying it. The saying is not for the child's benefit in the moment. It is a statement of fact by the person making it. This one is mine. This one is accounted for. Whatever else is true about the day that just ended, this remains true. There is a piece in that scene that most people recognize from one side or the other. Either you have stood in the doorway, or you were once the one asleep, or both. It is one of the quietest and most reliable things human beings do. That is the register of these old lines. They are not instructions. They are not conditions to be met. They are what someone says over a sleeping person. You do not have to hear them tonight. You do not have to feel them or agree with them. The parent in the doorway does not require the child to wake up and acknowledge the sentence. The sentence is true either way. That is what makes it different from almost everything else being said to you during the day. Notice that the promise about the water is also in the past and future tense, but never in the imperative. Nothing is being asked of the person. There is no instruction anywhere in it. No behavior required, no condition attached. It is entirely a set of statements about what someone else has done and will do. That is unusual, and it is worth noticing at this hour when the mind is looking for something to do. There is nothing to do here. There is only something to be told. Consider what it would mean to be spoken over rather than spoken to be the sleeping child in the doorway rather than the student in the classroom. That is what this hour offers you, not a lesson. A sentence said over you in the dark by someone who is not expecting a reply and who would not want you to wake up in order to give one. Most of the day is spoken to you. Instructions, requests, notifications, expectations. All of it addressed to a version of you that is awake and capable and expected to respond. This is the other kind. This is language with nothing attached to it. Feel the room now in your imagination. Feel yourself lying in it as someone who has already fallen asleep, even if you have not. Feel that the words are continuing above you, whether or not you are following them, the way they continued over you when you were very small. Feel the water in the promise, not as a threat, only as something you are inside that is moving past you, that is not closing over your head. It is moving. You are passing through it. That is what the promise said would happen. Feel your own name in whatever voice first said it to you. not as a summons, not as a demand, not as the sound of being called in trouble, as a fact being stated quietly by someone standing in a doorway who has no intention of waking you. You are held tonight by a grace that operates by name, not by category. It is not tracking a population. It is not managing a system or working through a queue. It has your particular name and has been saying it for a long time, including on the many nights you were not awake for it. There is peace in being accounted for. It does not require you to do anything with it. It does not require you to feel worthy of the accounting or to have earned your place on the list. You were on the list before you knew there was one. You were on it as a child. You have been on it during every year. You did not think about it at all. Rest inside your own name tonight. Let it be said over you by whatever voice you can imagine saying it kindly. Let the water move past you without closing over. Let the doorway stay open and the sentence keep being spoken while you sleep. Rest without answering. Nothing here needs a reply. There is a peace in that which most conversations cannot give you. Do not be afraid. You have been called by name. You are accounted for. You always were. There is one last image before the night is done. There is one last image to carry into sleep tonight. It comes from a single line in the longest of the old songs, and it is the smallest picture in this entire night. The line says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." Most people hear that and picture something bright, a floodlight, a beam that shows the whole road ahead, all the way to wherever it goes. That is not what the line describes. Consider what a lamp actually was to the person who wrote that. It was a small clay dish, about the size of the palm of a hand. It held a little olive oil, and a wick came out of a pinched spout at one end. Lit, it produced a flame roughly the size of the one on a birthday candle. That is the lamp in the line. That is the entire light source. Now consider walking with one at night on a rough road in a country full of loose stones. You would hold it low, near the ground, because that is where the danger is. You would see one step, perhaps two. The circle of light on the ground would move as you moved, and everything outside that circle would be completely dark, and the road ahead would remain invisible, no matter how long you walked or how carefully you looked. A lamp to my feet, not to the horizon, to the feet. Consider what that walk would actually feel like. Slow, deliberate. Your attention entirely on the next few feet of ground. You would not be thinking about the destination. You could not. The destination would be somewhere out in the dark, unlit, unavailable to you, and thinking about it would only make you stumble on the stone in front of you. And yet people made those walks constantly. Every night, in every village, someone walked home this way. It worked. It has always worked. It is how essentially everyone in human history got anywhere after sundown. Notice how different that is from what most people want. Most people want the road illuminated. They want to see where this is going, how it resolves, whether the thing they are worried about turns out all right in the end. That is not what was ever offered. What was offered is a small flame, held low, showing one step. There is something in that which is either frustrating or enormously relieving, depending on the hour. At 2 a.m, it is relieving, because the reason you are awake is almost certainly that you have been trying to light the whole road from your bed. You have been attempting to see 6 months out. You have been trying to establish tonight, at this hour, how a thing will end that has not even started yet. The lamp does not do that. The lamp has never done that. It was not built to. That is not a limitation you have to work around. It is the design. You were given a small light on purpose by an arrangement that has always assumed you would be walking in the dark and that has never once expected you to see further than your feet. Consider what a person walking with a small lamp actually experiences, not certainty. Something better suited to a night walk. Enough light for the next step. Then, once that step is taken, enough for the one after it. The circle moves with them. It never runs out, and it never widens. Notice that the light does not have to be large to be sufficient. It only has to be where the foot is going. Notice also that every step you have already taken in your life was taken this way, whether or not you realized it. You did not see this year from 5 years ago. You did not see this room. You walked into it one step at a time, in a circle of light about a meter wide, and here you are. You do not need to see the road tonight. You are not walking tonight. You are lying down. The lamp is on the floor, beside you, still lit, showing a small warm circle on the stones, and there is nowhere at all you have to be. That is the last thing to hold. The road will still be there tomorrow. The lamp will still be lit. The circle will move when you move, and not before. Consider that everyone you admire walked their life this way. Nobody has ever been given the whole road. The people who seem to have known what they were doing were holding the same small lamp you are holding, seeing the same one step, and finding out what came next by arriving at it. That is not a disappointing fact. It is a leveling one. There is no version of a human being who gets the floodlight. There never has been. Feel the small clay dish now in your imagination. Feel how little it weighs in the hand. Feel the warmth of it near your fingers. Feel the small, steady flame, no bigger than a thumbnail, entirely unbothered by how much dark is in the room around it. Feel the circle it makes on the floor, small, sufficient, not asking to be larger, not apologizing for its size. You are held tonight inside a circle of light that is exactly the size it needs to be. You do not have to see past it. You were never given the equipment to see past it, and the not seeing is not a failure on your part. It is simply what a lamp is. There is a grace in a light that small. It asks nothing of you. It cannot be used to plan with. It cannot be used to worry with, which may be its best quality. It can only be used to walk with, one step, when the time comes to walk. That is a grace, shaped like a limitation. Most of the good ones are. The lamp will not show you the future, and so the lamp will not let you spend the night in it. Consider how the oil worked in those lamps. A small clay dish held perhaps enough for a few hours, not the whole night. People filled them again when they needed to, or they let them go out and slept in the dark, which was also fine, because a person lying down does not need to see. Observe that the lamp was for walking, only for walking. Nobody in that century sat up at night, holding a lamp and staring into the dark, trying to see further. They lit it to get somewhere, and when they arrived, they put it out. You are not going anywhere tonight. You have arrived. The lamp can be set down on the floor now, and it can burn low, and it can even go out entirely before morning, because the only thing you have to do between now and sunrise is lie still and breathe. Rest inside the circle. Rest without the road. Rest in the small warm space that is all anyone has ever actually been given. Let the road stay dark. The lamp is lit, and it is enough, and it will still be enough in the morning, when you get up and take the one step that is available to you then. The lamp is beside you. The road is dark. The circle is small, and it is enough. Somewhere a stone is standing upright in an empty field where a young man slept badly and woke up knowing something. Somewhere a folded paper is going soft in a coat pocket, Somewhere a small bird is asleep in a roof beam, entirely unaware of where it is. Somewhere in a house that no longer exists, an old woman is reading aloud to a boy who has already stopped listening. None of them are doing anything. All of them are held. That is the whole of it. That is all this night has been saying, in 12 different ways, for the last 3 hours. You do not need to remember anything you heard tonight. If one image stayed with you, let that be enough. Perhaps the stone under a young man's head, perhaps the paper in the fisherman's coat, perhaps the small circle of lamplight on a dark road. Any one of them is enough. You will not remember the order they came in. You will not remember which one was about the field and which one was about the boat. That is entirely as it should be. The stories were not the point. The room being occupied for 3 hours was the point, and that has already happened, whether or not anything stayed. And if nothing stayed, that is fine too. The words were never going into you. They were going over you, the way a grandmother's voice went over a boy who could not sleep and who remembered nothing but the feeling of the room. If you are still with us, thank you for staying. If you have already drifted off somewhere along the way, thank you for that too. Both were welcome here. Wherever you are right now, in whatever room, at whatever hour, you are welcome exactly as you are. You have been called by name. You are held. Sleep well tonight, deeply, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Chapel.